Those were our two major agency presentations. Now we have I think, four individual stakeholder testimonies, beginning with the ARC of Virginia. Tanya, we'll get you up here first.
Very good. Hi.
Hey, how are you doing?
Good. How are y'all? First, Tanya Milling, Executive Director at the ARC of Virginia, and thank you for allowing me to speak today. You are all very familiar with the issues here, so I'm going to try to give you the personal perspectives of our members. So first, I want to say thank you for the continued commitment for funding DD waivers. Since 2016, when the DD system was redesigned, Virginia has clawed its way back from being 49th in the nation for supporting people with disabilities to now 38th. 38th, still in the bottom quartile of states for the provision of services for citizens with developmental disabilities, despite having one of the highest per capita incomes of any state in the nation. So without adequate funding, our system is broken and ineffective in many ways. The waiting lists, the number of people just that in need continues to rise, while the community capacity continues to drop. The workforce crisis, like all industries, the community of care is facing a devastating workforce crisis. But unlike all industries, Virginia's DD system was in a workforce crisis long before the pandemic due to low provider rates that were outdated and designed to pay staff at only the 50th percentile wage, making it impossible for the DD system of care to keep up with the labor market. The approach, our system is simply reactive, only providing services once someone's needs become urgent. The only way to get a waiver in this state is to be in Priority 1. That builds a cycle of dysfunction, never allowing the system to balance or to benefit from utilizing less expensive services. It's like people are being triaged in an emergency room that is full and overflowing, instead of building a system that's proactive and efficient and long-visioned. The impact, this all leaves people with disabilities and families without services they desperately need. Right now, 0 of the slots allocated in fiscal year 22 have been given out to people, and 1 in 4 of the fiscal year 21 slots continue to go unused because of the lack of community capacity. So if 14,000 people are waiting, if those with a waiver slot can't get staff or help, and if over 1,000 slots funded by the General Assembly go unused, then we would say the DD system needs to be rescued. The ARC of Virginia, I'm sure you know, is a primary source of resource navigation for families. We get calls from across the state all the time to get assistance in navigation through the system. And this last year, through the pandemic, but particularly this last year when the workforce crisis has hit such a head, the requests for assistance have grown significantly and become much more dire. We've received countless calls from individuals and families in desperate situations. And these are just some of the recent examples. Being institutionalized due to a lack of critical services, laying in bed for 2 days, unable to get up, obtain food, medicine, or go to the bathroom. Going days without a shower because no staff showed up. Being displaced or relocated without notice from your home because of staff shortages. A group home in Western Virginia, struggling from a lack of staff, had to close and drop off all their residents at a local hospital emergency room. We are also seeing higher instances of harm, like a broken shoulder bone that staff were unaware of, bruising all over someone's body, oozing fluid from their ear without explanation, someone found soiled when their family came to pick them up for a visit because staff had just been too busy to help them. These are just examples of some of our advocacy cases. Staff are overworked and underpaid, and in some cases, no staff exists. So under these circumstances, certainly harm is happening, and it will happen. In collaboration with Virginia Access, the ARC of Virginia's DD network is proposing to the General Assembly a DD system rescue plan. That is based on the recommendations from last year's waiver stakeholder group that you all pulled together, but with a more aggressive timeline and a focus on equity and sustainability. While this proposed package is for the upcoming biennium, it is part of a larger strategy to transform our system from being reactive in nature, only serving what someone's in urgent need, to proactive. To do this, first, fund equitable and sustainable rates by funding services at the 75th percentile in the community, like what is included in the governor's budget for state facilities, including those services not included in the governor's budget that do help people to have a life like yours. Excuse me. Funding supported living, an alternative to group homes, equal to the smallest, most integrated group home rate, which is 4 persons, and that's the desired size for Department of Justice. Second, fund innovation to expand and transform capacity. Third, fully fund priority 1. And fourth, once the system stabilized, build core services for the over 10,000 people that would be left waiting before they're in crisis, so that we can spend less on their needs. The funding investment we're advocating for is indeed significant. However, the cost of not funding the DD System Rescue Plan is much higher and much more detrimental for Virginians with developmental disabilities and their families. So thank you for your work, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Tanya. Any questions for Tanya? There. Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
Karen, I believe you're up next.
Good afternoon.
Okay.
Good to see you. Well, Tanya kind of covered a lot of my points because we are working together on our joint rescue plan. So I thought I'd just take a couple minutes and thank you, first of all, for the 12.5% temporary rate increase this last year that goes through June 30th and ends June 30th, 2022. Quite frankly, I don't know what we would have done without it. We already had many of our day programs closed, our group support and employment programs closed. And over the last 9 months or so, they've really tried hard to reopen, to convince people to come back, that it's safe to be engaged in programming again. Just to find out the other day on a call with members in Northern Virginia that a number of our large providers and providers in Northern Virginia have once again closed. They closed the week before Christmas, and they were going to reopen on the 10th of January and now have extended that again to the 17th of January. They felt it was prudent with the current variant going around to protect both staff and the individuals they serve. And because virtual services stopped August 29th, for providers to be able to provide that delivery method. Those people are home with their families or in their group homes or sponsored residential homes without day services. As Tanya said, the staffing crisis isn't new. And when Mike notified us on Saturday that to come testify today, I thought it would be interesting to go back and look to see what I said when we did the last rebase report in 2015 based on 13-14 data. And that was September 29th, 2015. At that time, we had a dire concern about the fact that the rate rebased based its assumptions, wage assumptions, on 50 percentile of the Bureau of Labor Statistics. We thought it was a flashing red light, especially for those high-cost areas like Northern Virginia and Richmond, that this would not solve our issue of expanding community capacity, because we cannot expand community capacity without staff. And staff, we ask a lot of our staff. They have to document, they have to have certain qualifications. They have to work with people with behavioral needs and significant health needs, and we need to pay them accordingly. Something I also wanted to point out, so I'm not repetitive with Tanya, is that I think it's important to remember that DD waiver providers, unlike other Medicaid providers, rely solely on the DD waiver rate appropriated by the General Assembly. Unlike hospitals and possibly nursing homes, we do not privately bill. We do not, we don't privately bill. We don't bill Medicare. We don't have private insurance. We don't have private pay, et cetera, et cetera. So our staff wages are 100% solely based on the rate that we receive. So if the foundation of that rate is inadequate, the whole rate builds on something that isn't structurally sound. And what's funny is that's exactly what we said in 2015, that we needed to look at it again, maybe rebase every 2 to 3 years so we can keep abreast of what was going on, but we haven't. This is the first time since the last time we all got around the table and talked about this that we've rebased. I also included what happens, what the state of the community is because of low wages and how that affects staffing crisis. I included a graph that Tanya I put together that is based on data from DMAS that shows that pre-virtual services being available as a delivery mode of services to some folks, that services for group-supported employment and day services, which includes community engagement, community coaching, plummeted about 73.5% over the last 16 months. And it came up a little bit when virtual services were available to about 62% down. But then it's now going back down because virtual services haven't been available in that delivery for those services since August 29th. You've all heard it. You've seen it in the papers. The Washington Post is covering articles from New York. We are not unique with the crisis for the staffing, but I think we've almost could see it coming. And I think because of the additional resources in the budget, if we don't do it now, then when? When are we going to do it? When are we going to take care of this? Providers have closed, are closing, consolidating residences and programs. In many cases, a lot of my members who tried to provide community engagement, community coaching, and some of the other more integrated services are saying, oh no, we were losing money before COVID on these services because of the rates. There's no way we're going to take these on when we're able to reopen until we fix the rate service problem. Staff vacancy rates amongst our members have increased to a high of 38%. Overtime costs have exploded, of course, when you're short on staff. You call in your managers or supervisors. That's exploded, and what happens is the human toll on those staff. They get burned out, and then they resign, and they just don't think it's worth it any longer. So what we ask of you, like Tanya said earlier, is that you please fund the full DD waiver rate rebase using a wage assumption at 75 percentile of the BLS. It's going to be a significant amount of money. But if not now, when? I also wanted to point out that you all know that the governor picked 8 of the almost 30 services under the waiver. You can't really pick and choose certain services. It's really a continuum of services. They're all and interrelated. You press on one, something else happens to the other. Individuals usually have multiple services. So if one provider can't provide services and another can, it completely destroys their individualized plan. And so we do not support this strategy of picking winners and losers. It's either all or nothing. And finally, I do want to say that, this is a people-person business. It's all about people. It's about our staff and the people they serve. And we want to make sure that we provide staff with a living wage so that, because of the backbone of our service system. Low wages undercut all of our efforts in increasing quality of services. And we need to make a significant investment in the system now that we have the resources. It tells a lot about us. If we don't do it now, then when? Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Carrie. All right. Jennifer Fedora. Yes. Got two Jennifers coming up. Jennifer Fedora will be first.
And thank you very much for being here and for listening. And I will try not to be repetitive of what either Tanya or Karen have said. Better? Okay, thank you. Yesterday, when I sat down to write my notes, before I did that, I went to get my lunch, went to Arby's. Big sign on the door. Dining room is closed because we have no staff. Yeah. You've seen those signs all over the place. When Arby's can't fill their vacant shifts, they bring in the managers, and I'm sure it is a manager who was at the drive-through window. If necessary, they scale back their services. Clearly, if we can't fill our shifts, we bring in our managers, we bring in our admin people. I was hearing stories about the bookkeeper who was working the night shift at a group home, and every other soul that we can find to cover those shifts. But we can't scale back services. It's just not doable. So the workforce crisis, as has been said, is, if nothing else, exhausting. It is wearing us out. You see the stories about the hospitals and the nurses in the hospitals and how tired they are. We're exhausted. We are absolutely done. And yes, errors occur. Things happen. I sympathize with the families who go and find someone not in the best condition. And that's terrible, and I'm sorry. But we're exhausted. So I have two thoughts. One, yes, please fund what the governor put in his budget. But recognize that those are only a small portion of the services. They are not the entirety, and they're not the ones that in a workforce crisis are going to be the most usable. The group day, the group supported employment, the larger group homes are the ones that are the services that we have. Admittedly, DOJ is not thrilled. At this point, okay. But they're the ones with the staff to resident ratios that are maybe possible in a workforce crisis. You know, and they're good services. I mean, it's not that there's anything wrong with them, but they're possible until we get on the other side of this crisis. Without the funding, which you supply, you write those checks, and without that funding, we cannot raise the wages to be competitive. I just cringed when Commissioner Land said, you know, we want to pay $17 an hour. Oh. You know, and any waiver service anywhere near a state hospital just lost their staff. Yeah, you know, $17 an hour in the state benefit package. We can't compete with that. So until we have something that can be truly competitive, we are not going to be able to get our feet under us enough to be able to deal with the priority one waiting list. You know, Tanya gave you the numbers. We can't grow. I mean, you fund slots. Thank you. That's wonderful. Great. But if we can't provide those services, the slots are meaningless. And we're just right there on the bitter edge of falling apart. So we have put in an amendment request, thank you, Senator Hanger has, I think, agreed to submit it, to do the rate increase for some of the other services that will at least utilize the rebase numbers that we have and will give us the opportunity to get rolling again a little bit. But this isn't the end. I mean, we're going to have to do this again. We have another minimum wage increase coming up in January of next year. You know, this may get us through this year, but it's not going to get us through forever. I want to say one other kind of thing that just I want you to hear it. I was asked to give a presentation at a House committee a couple of weeks ago. What were our session priorities? And it, I wasn't being facetious. I promise you I wasn't trying to be facetious. It was, we need stability. We truly need some stability in the system. Our system is not perfect. Our system doesn't do everything it's supposed to do. Our system doesn't work the way it's all entirely supposed to. But every time we perceive that the system is a little not right, we add a service. We change something. We tinker with something. We muck with this or we muck with this other thing. We are experts at standing up new services. We do that really well. What we don't know how to do is scale up a service to meet a broader need, because we rarely have a chance to do that. We stand up a new service, and then we stand up another new service. And we don't have the chance to give us 3 years, give us some time, give us something to be able to scale up what we've got. This is true of the Bravo services, it's true of the children's services, and it's certainly true in the DD world. We know how to do this. We just have to have a chance to do it and not be constantly in turmoil. So we need the stability in the service array. We certainly need the stability in the workforce. That's going to be the bottom line for all of this. And lastly, we need the stability in the sufficiency of the funding. If I could write the rules, which I can't, but if I could, I'd want you to be thinking at this biennium about what we're going to do for funding in the next biennium. Be thinking ahead enough that we're planning to do this thing so that we have some basis upon which to build a business and look ahead. Now, I have no illusions that that's going to happen, but I wish that's the way we were thinking about it. Even if you couldn't do it, you were thinking about it. So the workforce is our biggest issue. We thank you for the 12.5%, as Karen said. We couldn't have made it this far without it. We thank you for supporting what's in the governor's budget for the rebase. We particularly thank you if we can get the rest of those funding items in, and then think about what we're going to do next year. So, thank you for listening. Thank you for your time.
Well, thank you, Jennifer. Any questions at this moment? Okay, thank you, Jennifer. And finally, Jennifer from our community service boards.
Hi, good afternoon. Jennifer Faison, Executive Director of the Virginia Association of Community Services Boards. Thank you all for inviting me to speak this afternoon. I recognize you are already about 7 minutes past your adjournment time, so I will try to bat clean up, as they say. I'm terrible at sports analogies, but I hope that's the right one. So, as you know, the community services boards, are 40 of them, make up the public safety net. I look across this table and I see folks who have advocated on behalf of the entire system of care for people with behavioral health and developmental disability services needs. So none of you are strangers to what is happening in our system, and none of you are strangers to how critical it is to ensure that we're getting this right. So in what I would call a very rare change of events, for CSBs, we had a list of priorities that we had developed over the summer and into the early fall. And what we found was that there was a lot to like in the governor's budget in terms of matching up with the priorities that we had already identified. And so you saw both in Commissioner Land's comments and Director Kimsey's comments, a recap of what is included in those two areas of the budget. So I'll just very quickly touch on the things that we saw that we would like to protect and preserve, because we recognize that none of that is set in stone at this moment. Certainly the funding for STEP Virginia is critical. Funding those last three services will get us to that baseline level of services and supports that was the agreement between the state, the VACSB, DBHDS, and other agencies involved. At some point, we're going to need to go back and circle around to those very first services that we brought online, because that would have been in 2017, 2018, and recognize that we need to probably boost that funding level as well. But I'm not going to, borrow trouble. So just put that in the old back pocket. So we're very pleased to see the STEP Virginia funding in there. We're very pleased to see the funding for the waiver slots. We recognize that there are some challenges there in terms of getting those slots online and allowing them to be fully utilized. But what I will say is that it's an important statement of intent to include those slots in the budget. We do believe that things can get better with some of the other things that are in play right now in terms of funding. And so we would like the slots to exist, recognizing that we will be able to use them at a date certain in the future. We also were very glad to see what was included in terms of the waiver rate rebase. I think the comments of my colleagues really do track with what we see at the CSB level. It's incredibly difficult to hire and maintain staffing, especially when you've got these minimum wage increases coming online. And so we believe that what is in the governor's budget is an important step in the right direction. I will say, you paid for the rate study. You had a contractor that has some national chops. They did a thing, all of the numbers and the formulas that they came up with. I think you could battle on the methodology, you can battle on the numbers that they used and things like that. But the bottom line is they devised a plan for all of the services for all of the DD waiver services. And if you decide that you're going to do, let's say there are 30 and you're going to do even 28 of them, then those other two are just behind still. And then when you go to do the rebase the next time, you're going to have to bring those services you didn't do this time up to where they needed to be 2 years ago at the time of the 2 years in the future rebase, and you're going to have to start over with all the other services. So you're creating an imbalance that the rebase was in fact designed to even out, so that we're not just being like, oh, and you get like the Oprah special, and you get a rate increase, and you get a rate increase, without some sort of real balanced approach to how to do that. So we like what we saw, but we recognize that the whole methodology and the reasoning behind doing a rate rebase and the study and the modeling is that you have a comprehensive way to bring your system to where it needs to be. The other thing that was mentioned that we're really excited to see is the money for permanent supportive housing. That is not a service, quote unquote, that the CSBs provide, but what we know is that one of the biggest barriers to discharge for people who are clinically ready is that they don't have an appropriate housing placement. And it is very difficult to deliver services if somebody's living under an overpass. So when we can get somebody into a permanent supportive housing slot, it makes the effectiveness of those treatment and recovery services that much greater. So we're very pleased to see that funding in there. I think the last number that I saw was we needed in our system about 5,000 permanent supportive housing slots, according to a report that you all get each year, and we're at about 2,500 in Virginia. So we're making good headway, and I think Co-Chair Howell and many of you here on this committee have been committed to that, and it's incredibly valuable. So what is it that we didn't see in the governor's budget that's going to be really critically important for us? And that is that we did not see any direct funding to address the workforce issues within your CSB system. So what we know is that CSBs run 24/7 operations. Many of them run facilities. Okay. Many of them run facilities for individuals with developmental disabilities, which are intermediate care facilities, and these are people who also have complex medical needs. They run 24/7 residential group homes for individuals with DD, for individuals with substance use disorder, and we even have some behavioral health group homes that are burgeoning and developing. So same profile of individual, trying to serve those folks in the community. Many of the same staffing challenges that you have heard Commissioner Land speak about exist within the CSB system as well. And so what the VA-CSB developed is a funding proposal that would be $167.5 million for a four-pronged approach to developing the workforce within the CSB system. And that would include recruitment and retention bonuses, such as a similar strategy as was provided to the state hospitals. I think Commissioner Land said very well, you know, it's not a silver bullet, if you will. It's a way to stabilize the workforce in order to, you know, so that you can get to where you need to be with it. So we would be looking at that. We would also be utilizing a portion of those funds to ensure that we could pay for clinical supervision for folks, growing them within our CSB system. You did see in the governor's budget $3 million that was appropriated for a contract with the Virginia Health Care Foundation. They do fabulous work. Our concern is that that level of funding and the parameters for the way that that program would likely be rolled out would not penetrate into the CSB system specifically, that it would be open to any provider, which is great. But in order to get that targeted penetration into the CSB system, we believe we would need funding specific for that purpose. In addition, out of those funds, we would be looking at funding some scholarships and loan repayment programs, recognizing that in some instances, a person has gone through a certain level of educational attainment and they need to be reimbursed for their student loans as a recruitment or retention tool. But on the front end too, we recognize that there are people who cannot get to a new expanded level of educational attainment without some sort of financial support to do so. So that's really kind of the front end and the back end on a little bit more of a midterm way to help to grow our workforce. So that's basically in batting cleanup. What I would say we are looking at, again, want to emphasize the 12.5% rate increase that's been a savior in many service areas, especially because that was not relegated to what we would consider to be traditional HCBS services. There were some behavioral health services included in there as well. So we were very grateful for that and look forward to working with you all as this session moves forward on and the myriad, I'm sure, of legislative approaches as well as budgetary approaches to improving our public behavioral health system. Thank you all, and happy to answer your questions.
Okay. Are there questions? Well, I guess I would have just a couple comments. I noted just the recent passing of Mary Ann Bergeron. I guess she trained you? Or did y'all work together?
She changed my life.
Did she?
She absolutely did. Yep. She was a very special lady.
Yeah, yeah. you know, we've all been at this a while, and I guess we're in a transition point now with the administration where there are going to be a lot of new people involved that are going to have, I guess, a learning curve. But for some of us, myself certainly, because Senator Barker wasn't able to get a good agreement on redistricting, well, I guess we feel a sense of urgency because, I mean, the good Lord's in charge. We might not even be here tomorrow, but from a legislative standpoint, I'd like to see us get a lot done over the next 2 years. You know, I think that's really what our commitment needs to be within this subcommittee, particularly because, and the individuals here that have worked with us for years and hopefully will continue to work with us. I think we need a sense of urgency. We've had, I know some of you all, Allison, you in particular with behavioral health, and of course with the CSPs, all of us have been, you came on board and you had a learning curve, but you thought you were going to plow new ground. But with all the COVID, you've been going back and repairing the flood damage. So we're, hopefully, we can just basically commit to get this thing done to where we can, when we have the COVID behind us and the wind behind our back, that we'll come flying out the other end in a much better system here in the Commonwealth than we have currently. It's going to be tough, but I really sense that within this subcommittee, I think we have the commitment to get that done, and hopefully we can work on it, dig in, and get it done. Any of the other members have any comments or questions this time? Okay, well, went over a little bit. We got a lot of good information. Thank you, Jennifer, and all of you all. We will go ahead. We are live now, so I'm going to go ahead and officially adjourn this meeting of the Health and Human Resources Subcommittee, and thank everyone for your attendance present here and online. Thank you.